At 2 in the morning, the Duke of Fenwood stood outside his wife's door with his hand raised, and could not make himself knock. He had been there, by the long case clock in the corridor, for the better part of an hour. He had rehearsed 11 sentences and discarded all of them. The line of candlelight under her door had gone out at midnight and come back at 1:30, which meant she was not sleeping either, and that was somehow worse than if she had been. 6 weeks ago, he had sent her out of this house on the night of their wedding. Gideon had gone over that hour so often since that it had worn smooth, like a stair. The wedding at 11. The breakfast at 1, at which he had stood up and said something dry about being an old bachelor and been laughed at kindly. The guests gone by 6. Emmeline in the long drawing-room at 8 in her wedding gown with her shoes off, laughing, telling him what her aunt's dreadful cousin had said about the flowers. And the letter, brought in on a salver at 8:20 with the London postmark, which he had opened standing by the window, because he had been waiting 11 days for it, and could not have left it till morning if the house had been on fire. Mr. Halliday, the eye surgeon at Bartlett Street, had written 4 paragraphs. Gideon had needed only the 3rd. I can give you no comfort on the point you press me upon. The clouding at the margins, the halo about a candle flame, the loss of the small print at arm's length. These, with your mother's history at the same age, admit of one interpretation only. I would be a poor friend to flatter you. In my judgment you have some years of useful sight remaining, 3, perhaps 5, and you must use them. He remembered turning round with the paper in his hand. He remembered his wife's face, still amused, still waiting for him to answer her about the flowers. And he remembered what he had done, which he had believed at the time to be the single decent act of his life. He had told her, in his flattest magistrate's voice, that there was a circumstance he had not disclosed before the marriage. He had put the surgeon's letter into her hands and made her read the 3rd paragraph aloud. He had then informed her that the carriage would be at the door in half an hour to take her to her aunt at Netherby, that his attorney would wait upon her within the week to explain what might be done, that a marriage may be set aside where a material circumstance has been concealed, and that he would swear to the concealment himself in any court in England, and make no defense whatever, and that whatever came of it, she would have the Fenwood dower house, and 2,000 a year for her life, and no obligation of any kind. Emmeline had said, "Gideon, sit down and talk to me." He had said, "I will not have a wife of 26, spend the next 40 years leading a blind man about his own house, and I would rather do this tonight, in cold blood, than in 3 years when you have not the heart left to go." She had said, "You are not asking me anything." He had said, "No." And then he had walked out of the long drawing-room on his own wedding night, and stood in the stable yard in the dark until the carriage had gone away down the avenue, and had not looked at it, because if he had looked at it, he would have stopped it. 6 weeks, 2 letters from his attorney saying that her Grace had received him civilly and declined to instruct anybody. 1 letter from her aunt, which he had not answered because he could not read the whole of it without a glass and would not have it read to him by his secretary. No letter at all from Emmeline. Then yesterday afternoon, at 4 o'clock, a hired chaise had come up the avenue, and his wife had walked into the hall with 1 box, given her cloak to a footman, told the housekeeper that she would take the blue room for the present and would like a fire and some bread and butter, and gone upstairs without asking whether the Duke was at home. She had not sent for him, he had not gone up. They had passed each other once on the stairs at 7, and she had said, "Good evening," and he had said, "Good evening," and that was the whole of the 6 weeks. So now he stood outside her door at 2 in the morning with his hand raised, and the plain fact of the matter was that he was frightened, and that he had been frightened for 11 days before the letter came, and for 6 weeks since, and that no part of his life had prepared him for it. The door opened. Emmeline stood there in a wrapper with her hair down over one shoulder and a candle in her hand, and looked at him without the least surprise. "You have been there 55 minutes," she said. "The boards outside this room are the worst in the house. I counted them when I was a girl visiting your mother." Gideon put his hand down. "I did not wish to wake you." "You did not wake me. I have been sitting up reading your mother's letters, which are in the box under that window, which is a thing you might have thought of before now." She stood back. "Come in, or I shall come out, and I have no shoes on, and it is 2 o'clock, so I recommend the first." He did not move. "Emmeline, your reputation." "Gideon," said his wife, "I am your wife." He came in. She left the door standing wide open behind him, which he understood obscurely to be a kindness rather than a precaution, and set the candle on the mantel, and sat down in the chair by the fire, and pointed at the other one. "Now," she said, "you have had 6 weeks to arrange what you meant to say at my door. Say it." Gideon sat down. The fire was low, and the candle on the mantel had the ring around it that he had first noticed in March, and had told himself was smoke. "I meant to say that you should not have come back," he said. "That was the substance." "And the rest?" "The rest was a great deal of matter about the Dower House." "Then I shall save you the trouble. I have read Mr. Halliday's letter." "You read the 3rd paragraph. I made you read it aloud, which was—" he stopped. "It was an inexcusable thing to do to you in a wedding gown, and I have thought about it every night since." "I read the whole of it," Emmeline said. "All 4 paragraphs, not that night. The following morning at my aunt's at 6 o'clock, because I took it out of your hand and put it in my sleeve while you were telling me about the carriage, and you were too busy being noble to notice." She reached beside her chair and took up a folded paper, worn soft at the creases. "Do you know what is in the 4th paragraph, Gideon? Because I do not believe you ever read it." Gideon sat with his hands on his knees in a chair in the blue room at 2 in the morning, and understood that she was perfectly right. He had read to the end of the 3rd paragraph, and folded the letter and gone to find his wife. "Read it," he said. Emmeline unfolded the paper and turned it to the candle. "You will wish to know what may be done. First, use the light you have, and do not waste a year of it in grieving, for I have seen that done, and it is the only part of this that is a waste. Second, learn the ground now while you can see it, your house, your rooms, your stairs, your park, so that when the time comes your feet will know what your eyes do not. Third, and I say this as a man who has attended a great many people in your case, do not send away the ones who love you. They will not thank you for it, and you will not survive it. The gentlemen who bear this best are those who are known by somebody. You wrote to me of your mother. I attended her at the last, as you may recall, and I will tell you what she said to me in the final year, which was that being led about her own house by your father was the happiest thing that had ever happened to her, and that she had never once been sorry for anything except the 2 years at the beginning when she had tried to spare him." Emmeline put the letter down in her lap. The fire had almost gone. Neither of them said anything for a long time. "She never told me that," Gideon said at last. His voice did not work properly. "She went blind when I was 11. I remember the 2 years at the beginning. She used to send us all out of the room. And afterwards my father read to her every evening of his life, 3 hours. He read her every word of the newspaper, including the shipping and the advertisements, and she used to laugh at the advertisements." He put his hand over his eyes. "I did not remember that until this minute. I have remembered the 2 years for 28 years, and I had entirely forgotten the 21 that came after." "Yes," said Emmeline. "I thought perhaps you had." He sat there with his hand over his eyes, and his wife did not come and put her arms round him, which he was afterwards grateful for beyond any words he had, because he could not have borne to be comforted at that moment. She waited. When he had command of himself, she went on, in a perfectly practical voice. "Now I shall tell you what I have been doing for 6 weeks, since you did not ask. On the second day I wrote to Mr. Halliday, and asked whether he would receive me. On the 9th day I went up to Bartlett Street with my aunt, and sat with him for 2 hours, and asked him 140 questions, which I had written out, and he answered every one and gave me the name of a man in Edinburgh, who is doing something with light and lenses that may or may not be nonsense, but is worth a journey. On the 20th day I began learning Fenwood. She said it steadily. I have the plans, your mother's own plans, out of the estate room which your steward sent me by carrier when I asked, and which I have had at my aunt's for a month. I have measured this house in paces, Gideon, every corridor, every stair, every door in my own paces and in an estimate of yours. There are 11 steps in the west stair and 13 in the east, and I have never once in my life met a person who knew that." Gideon lowered his hand and looked at her. "You have been learning my house." "I have been learning our house, and I have a notebook of it, and it is extremely dull, and you shall not see it because you cannot read my hand at arm's length any more, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." Her chin came up, and it was shaking. "And on the 31st day, I stopped waiting to be invited, because I worked out that you were never going to invite me, and that you had not sent me away because you did not want me. You sent me away because you had decided, at 8:30 on your wedding night, with a letter in your hand and no advice from anybody, that you were about to become a burden, and you would rather be a monster than a burden. I know you, Gideon. I have known you since I was 9 years old, and you pulled me out of the Fenwood carp pond and were very rude to me about it. You have not known me as a blind man. No, and you have not known me as a woman of 40 or 50 or 60, and neither of us knows what we shall be in 20 years, and nobody who ever stood up in a church knew that." Emmeline leaned forward. "Here is what I will not do. I will not be sent away twice. I will not have 2,000 a year and a dower house, and the whole county telling me for 40 years how well the Duke of Fenwood behaved. I would rather be your wife going blind with you than a duchess in a separate establishment being admired. And if you tell me again that you will not have me leading you about your own house, I shall tell you what your mother told Mr. Halliday, and I shall say it every day until you believe it." Gideon Fenwood sat in the low firelight with the ring around the candle flame, and looked at his wife's face while he still could, which was, he understood then, exactly what the 4th paragraph had been telling him to do. "I have 3 years," he said, "perhaps 5. "Then use them," said Emmeline, "and do not waste a year of it in grieving. I have the authority of an eye surgeon." He began, unexpectedly, to laugh, and it went wrong halfway and became the other thing, and his wife did come to him then, and knelt down on the hearthrug and took his head against her shoulder, and he wept for a long while like a man of 11 years old who had been sent out of the room. Afterwards, when the fire was quite dead and the candle had burnt down to nothing, he said, into her hair, "I have been outside that door every night this week." "I know," Emmeline said, "the boards I told you." "Why did you not open it?" "Because you had to knock." She sat back and put both her hands on his face and looked at him, and he looked at her. "You never did knock, did you? 6 weeks and 55 minutes, and you were going to go back down that corridor tonight as well." "Yes." "Then it is fortunate," said the Duchess of Fenwood, "that I know the sound of your step." She got up and went past him and closed the door. He had 4 years and 7 months of useful sight, in the end, which was more than Halliday had promised, and he spent them exactly as instructed. He learnt his ground. He walked Fenwood every morning with his wife's hand on his sleeve, and afterwards without it, counting, until his feet knew the 11 steps of the west stair and the 13 of the east, the change of flag to board at the library door, the draught from the north passage that told him where he was. He had the door frames of the principal rooms painted a pale color, while he could still see the difference, and a brass rail run round the terrace, and the gravel of the long walk laid coarse in the middle and fine at the edges, so that a man walking it in the dark could hear where he was. He went to Edinburgh. The man with the lenses was largely nonsense, but not entirely, and Gideon got another 11 months of reading out of it and was grateful to his wife for the rest of his life. And when it went at last, in the autumn of his 44th year, it went slowly and he was ready for it, and the house was ready, and so was she. She read to him every evening, 3 hours, from a chair set at his left hand because his left ear was the better one, the newspaper entire, including the shipping and the advertisements, at which she laughed, and then he laughed, and then neither of them could have told you what had been funny about it. She kept his rentals in a great clear hand and read them aloud on Tuesdays and disagreed with him about them. She never once moved a chair in that house without telling him. On the day their eldest was born, she put the baby in his arms and put his hand on the small head and did not say a word, because she had worked out long before, without being told, that he preferred to find things out with his own hands. Nobody in that county ever spoke of the Duke of Fenwood's affliction. What they spoke of, for 30 years, and what was still being told when both of them were long in the churchyard, was that a duke had sent his bride away on their wedding night out of a species of nobility that very nearly ruined them both, and that 6 weeks later she had come back up the avenue in a hired chaise with a box, a set of plans, and 140 questions, and that on the night he finally came to her door and stood outside it for 55 minutes without knocking, she had opened it herself because she knew the sound of his step,